Hey folks, welcome back to Gaming Garbage, where we take a look at games, chat about the gaming news in the industry, and of course, stream for fun. Today we're doing the worst company of the year. Last year we had Ubisoft. In 2023 I didn't do one, but I also do the worst game of the year. And the reason why I do these is because I think it's important to keep track of what's going on. Because whether we're looking at news articles, whether we're looking at stock stuff or financial information or reviews on games or the consoles themselves, generally things are positive for most companies. But sometimes I don't think we necessarily track too well what companies are actually doing, what franchise are actually doing, and some of the shifts that we see in the gaming industry. And so this year, I do have Nintendo for 2025. And again, not everyone is probably going to agree with that, and that's okay. And some are going to say, but Tread, what about the sales? Well, let's talk about it. And this is going to be a longer one, but we're going to go through the games. We're going to go through some of the sales. We're going to go through the ratings. We're going to go through the third-party stuff. We're going to go through the complaints about the console, about the bricking, about the key cards, about the NSO, about the paywalls, about the pricing. We're also going to take a look at the financials a little bit for the company. So this is going to be a pretty in-depth one. And these ones usually are. So thanks for tuning in. Let's go ahead and get started. So first, a lot of us will probably agree that Nintendo has always been a company to focus on affordability and on family and kids. They're usually cheaper consoles, usually cheaper accessories, at least they were for a while, but lately they've actually been more expensive in controllers and cameras and all of this other stuff, and amiibos now, and etc. Also, a lot of their IPs are kind of generally rated and catered to younger audiences, though what we see on YouTube is a whole bunch of 30-year-olds talking about Nintendo. Sometimes 40-year-olds. It's just kind of backwards. You wouldn't necessarily expect that. Generally, too, the focus of these IPs is that they're fun, they have fairly easy mechanics, they have memorable stories and characters, and again, for some of these characters, they've been running with them for 30 to 40 years. Again, if it's not broken, don't fix it. But I also think, too, the kids that have grown up with Nintendo are now adults and aging, and they're not just seeing Nintendo completely isolated anymore. We're now looking toward like, okay, they're trying to be competitive. They're trying to kind of work through a market. And what we're seeing is that Nintendo is trying to compete against some of the other companies. And maybe you wouldn't think so, but we're going to go over that too, because I think that's one of the issues that they have going forward. So ultimately, we got the launch of the Switch 2, and it was very, very good. We got to see through Nintendo's earnings that they sold 10.3 million Switch 2 consoles. It's the fastest selling rate Nintendo has ever had. We also had 9 million in sales for Mario Kart World and over 3 million in sales for Donkey Kong Bonanza. Basically 2 games roughly within a month of launch for the Switch 2. They sold very, very well. So let's take a look at the games, and this is all of them that we've basically had to date. Mario Kart World, Metacritic is a 86 as an average and 6.9 for users. And the reason the score has actually gone down is, well, we'll get to that in just a second. But roughly, we had 9.57 million in sales for Mario Kart World, but the credits roll in less than 3 hours. It's pretty fast. The Open World 2, as you search for P's and question marks, is actually pretty empty. And they kind of more or less feel kind of time-consuming things than anything else. But it is cool because Mario Kart World, it is finally an open world now for driving and racing. But again, it feels kind of empty for some and kind of lacking for some because, again, we've already had this in other previous games for pretty much roughly a decade. Again, to some, it feels like Nintendo is trying to catch up with Mario Kart, and they have to do something. Because, again, they haven't released a Mario Kart in quite a long time, because the last one we had was Mario Kart 8 for the Wii. Again, that's a pretty long time ago. We also had an update that pushed the interim tracks. So since we had this kind of open world, we had some tracks that linked to the other bigger 3-lap race tracks together, and they call them interim tracks. And players started quitting because the update or the algo or whatever you want to call it, the game basically pushed the interim tracks more than what the players wanted. So again, we started to see, which was kind of surprising to me, is that if players aren't getting what they want, they're actually willing to quit Nintendo games. That's kind of surprising. Some players that were still playing within 4 weeks, well, they started complaining about bots being in their lobbies. Now, it wasn't just a few bots. There's videos out there where there's literally like half of the entire team or racers that you're going against, or even over half in some cases, where they're bots. Some players even started trying different times of day or different weekdays or weekend days to see if they could actually find more actual players than bots, but no, that wasn't the case. And then today, we don't even hear about Mario Kart World. We don't even hear really anything about any updates either. By 6 weeks, players were, again, basically kind of done with the game, which was kind of surprising. The bot problem was getting worse. There was also an update that was used to fix the interim track problem. But again, players were saying that it didn't really fix it. Maybe it improved it some, because again, Nintendo said it did, but how much of a margin by 10 to 90%, we really have no idea. But we know it didn't actually really fix anything, at least for the players, because, well, they tried it and they're like, nah, it didn't really change anything. I'm still getting interim tracks way more often than I want. So it didn't have its intended effect. Players also felt, too, that the game was too grindy for skins, carts, and characters. But again, that's what live service games are basically built for, is that they're grindy. Or games that have a lot of collectibles, they're grindy. That's kind of really the point. So I feel like, in a way, they're kind of missing that. But there is a lot of skins. There is a lot of carts. There is a lot of characters. And again, there are specific ways to play in order to unlock some of that stuff, which does feel, in my opinion, a little grindy. There's also not enough game modes, which we're likely getting these later. Again, like I said, there's also no DLC announced after 6 months. It's kind of a long time, a little bit. And a lot of the hype for the game is just actually gone, which is probably the quickest death we've heard of for a Mario Kart game. And this was supposed to be the banger. And it just hasn't been. It had a good start, but wow, people are like, wow, I saw credits already, and things are super grindy. Some of the tracks are really cool. Some of the visuals are really cool, and I do think it's a step in the right direction. But there were a lot of things, too, that just felt unfinished, didn't feel like they were necessarily complete. There's just not enough game modes, the issues with the interim tracks. There were more complaints about the game than actual appreciations or things that people liked about the game. And for quite a few players, it felt like it was getting worse. All right. Sorry about that. I'll edit that out for the YouTube video. There was also a bundle for the game, so the console could sell with a Mario Kart World bundle, and this would basically make the game $50. Separately, it was the first $80 game. So a lot of people were looking at the cost, looking at how they were reviewing it, and I think this did skew some people's view of how good the game was or how bad the game was, depending on whether you spent the $50 roughly or ultimately the $80. That $30 price difference can make a difference in people's value proposition of a product. So if you paid $80, you're like, wow, this is not an $80 game. This is honestly pretty horrible. And then if it's a $50 game, well, you're more likely to probably enjoy it. That's usually what happens. You feel like you got a good deal or you got a good value or you're spending a lot of time of dollars per hour kind of a deal. And many actually got the game for $50. So I do think it skewed the score. Because I think if everybody paid $80, I don't think it would be a 6.9. out of 10 for users. I actually think it would be lower. But again, there's still a lot of people that enjoy the game. It honestly was pretty good for what it was, and I believe it is going in the right direction. We also had Donkey Kong Bonanza, sold 3.5 million units. Metacritic score was 91, and user score was 9.0. Again, this was a $70 game, so the $60 games are basically over, and we're moving into a new cost bracket for Nintendo games. And this is because of the 4K, this is because of the higher resolution, the ray tracing, and all of this other stuff. The games are not as simple to make anymore, so the cost goes up because it takes longer to make them. Even Nintendo said, well, don't expect games to come out as quickly as they have in the past because they take longer to make. We also had Donkey Kong Bonanza DLC Emerald Rush after roughly a month of launch, or a couple of months after launch, and this was a 66 for critics and a 4.8 for users. It really wasn't liked at all, and for a $20 price tag, most people in the reviews were saying that they were done after a couple of hours, or even less than that. They just didn't really appreciate it. The story itself for the entire game, the actual base game, was roughly 8 to 12 hours. A lot of people actually liked it, but it seemed actually to go pretty quickly. And again, for a $70 game, that would make almost roughly $12 an hour. For at least for some people, for those that actually beat it very quickly. Some actually beat it in 6, I guess. But if you did roughly 10 hours, to play the game on average, then yeah, you spend about 7 hours or $7 per hour, and that was pretty expensive for some people. A lot of the good scores that we saw on Metacritic played roughly 20 hours or more, probably trying to collect stuff and get everything, but again, the game didn't last as long as some people thought. Many liked the game, and it's actually the highest rated game for the Switch 2 so far. I'm not including the remasters on that. We also had Kirby the Forgotten Lands. This was on Metacritic for 83 out of 100 and an 8.3 for users. Again, it was an $80 game that forces you to basically buy the DLC, which is kind of insane, and also a $20 for the upgrade itself if you already earned or owned the game. So it was good for Kirby fans and for kids, but really not a lot of people, I think, are overly going to enjoy this. That's at least what a lot of viewers said, is that it was good for what it was. It was pretty good, or it was good, but again, it wasn't great. There wasn't anything overly amazing. It was really just for those the fans that they're going to enjoy. Next, we got to see Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. This was a remaster. Metacritic was a 95 and users were an 8.5. The upgrade was basically $10, or you could just buy it outright for an MSRP of $70 for a remaster. Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, same thing, 95 and an 8.3 for users. Upgrade again was $10, MSRP was $70. And while these are good games, while they have a lot of memories for a lot of players, $70 does seem like a lot for just 4K textures, some improvements, and some ray tracing. And while it was nice, you don't have to buy the game again directly. If you already have it in your library and Nintendo recognizes it, you just have to pay $10. But then we have other upgrades like Kirby Forgotten Lands, that's $20 for the upgrade. Mario Party Jamboree. This was also made for the Switch 2. Metacritic was 76 and a 5.5 for users. This also was an $80 game. This did come with Jamboree TV, but again, this didn't really seem to integrate very well. Not a lot of people overly enjoyed it. It didn't feel like it was really worth the money, but it was $60 for the Switch 1 version, which was actually a pretty good fit, but $80 for the Switch 2 version didn't really sit well with too many people. Because again, there wasn't anything, it didn't feel like it was worth that price tag. And that's something we're going to hit a lot with the value proposition for the games and for the console itself. Next, we had Drag X Drive. Metacritic had it 60 out of 100 and 4.7 for players. This again, too, though, was a $20 game, but this was kind of more or less to showcase the mouse controls for a game than anything else. See, the game wasn't actually built to be a game. It was really built to be a showcase for the controls. So if the controls didn't exist, probably the game would have never been made. We also had the Switch 2 Tour. Metacritic was a 54 and a 3.7 for users. It's honestly the lowest game that they have. This too was also $10, and while that is really cheap, when we actually got something like this type of tour for Wii, it was free. And ultimately, they didn't want to make it free for the Wii, but they did. But now that's the expectation, and they've gone back on that. And even for something so simple as just learning about the Switch 2, about the console, the controls, and other buttons and whatever, well, now you actually had to pay for that type of tour. So it really felt like a waste of money. Even though it's $10, it still feels like a waste. Because if you really just need to learn something, there's plenty of YouTube vids out there. Or you can just kind of tinker around and figure it out yourself. So yeah, now that Wii Sports was free, it really makes the tour look bad. Because, again, it's just showing you stuff. And instead of actually really giving you kind of some interesting games like what Wii Sports had, like tennis and golf and some others, or boxing, or bowling. No, it was bowling, I think. Instead, it's more just exactly what it sounds like. It's a tour to kind of try out and practice some stuff. So it also wasn't as innovative. And then you had to pay for it on top of it. Next, we also had Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 bundle. These were also remasters. This was Metacritic was a 87 and a 7.3 for users. This also was $70. If you bought the remasters separately, they were $40 a piece. So this also didn't necessarily make sense because maybe while they are smaller games or not as graphically demanding, we had to pay $70 MSRP for Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. And we also had $80 for Kirby Forgotten Lands. But Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 are $70 together. Again, the pricing doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense on this. The thing that's interesting too is that this bundle actually went on sale at Best Buy, but only for 3%. Now, Nintendo games don't normally go on sale very often, but it was interesting to see that it went on sale at all, especially pretty soon after launch. Next, we also had Pokemon Legends ZA. Metacritic had a 77, and users had a 4.7. Awful. This still sold 6 million in sales, though this was also a bundled console. So if people couldn't get the console with the game with Mario Kart World, which those all did sell, well, we also had the next tactic move on to another game, which we've never seen before. Because before, it was Mario Kart 8 with bundles for the Wii or for the Switch 1 or whatever. And again, that's why they've sold so many copies, like over 50 million copies, I think, of Mario Kart 8. But instead, we just didn't have Mario Kart this time. We have also had another IP with Pokemon Legends, and I wonder if we're ultimately going to see that again for a game that's just for Switch 2. So yeah, 6 million in sales. It did sell pretty good. Again, this was a $70 game if you bought it separately. But there were a few people that had crashes with the game. There was also kind of a minimum on mechanics and design and also modeling. Beat 'em Ups also had a really good video of just kind of looking at the design and effort put into the world. And the game, too, is also a really small map. From wall to wall on the other end, it basically takes you 2 to 3 minutes to get there. So we had a smaller map. We had a more sterile environment. There was nothing outside of the city. Some people were saying, too, though, there'd be a sewer system and all of this integration, underground stuff, whatever. Now, we do have a day-night cycle, which that is cool. They did bring back Mega Evolutions. But I think also, too, some of the monsters look horrendous. I mean, Victory Bell looks like a burlap bag. I'm not even kidding. It's pretty hilarious. But again, it didn't necessarily sit well with people. And again, if any of these that you like or enjoyed, that's perfectly okay. But we're talking about the averages for the experience. And I think what we're seeing here is that the whole thing with Pokemon Legends is that it just looks and feels low effort for a lot of players. Also, DLC was announced before the game even launched for $30, which is basically the X and Y version of Pikachu. That's what you're getting. And I don't even think you're getting those Pokemon. I think they're actually just Mega Evolves. So you get to pick which one you want. Next, we also get to see two Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment. Metacritic is a 79 and users is 8.5. Again, this is a $70 game. We also got to see two with Metroid Prime 4, which just came out roughly a couple weeks ago, or no, about a week ago. So far, the score is 80 for critics and 8.5 for users. One thing, though, that is kind of disheartening with Metroid Prime 4 is that, well, while you're driving around in the desert on your nice bike, getting from point A to point B to point C, there's no music. But they made some, they just don't have it available to you. You can either buy the amiibo for $30 and get the music, or there's actually a way to unlock it when you've already beaten the game. But I don't really know how many people are actually going to go back and play Metroid Prime 4. The thing, too, that's interesting is when we take a look at Metacritic for all of the Metroid Prime games, Metroid Prime 4 is actually one of the lowest rated. A lot of the Metroids are in the 90s or high 80s, but this is an 80. Not an 81, not an 85. It's just a flat-out 80 for the critics. So again, I think there's a level of expectation there that, again, that wasn't really met. And when we look at all of these games, let me run through these real quick. We had an 86, 91, 66, 83, 95, 95, which were the Legend of Zelda games that were remastered, 76, 60, 54, 87, 77, 79, and 80. While all of these are generally fairly high-scoring games for the big IPs, some of them, too, are just really for the remasters. They don't really feel like new games. Some of these, too, again, the price points are $70 or $80, depending on if you buy them separately or you didn't get them bundled with anything, which, again, feels like a lot for what you're actually getting. The value proposition is kind of lessened there. Another thing, too, is that none of these games really feel great and amazing. They're good, which is good. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think, too, people kind of expected more bangers than what we've actually gotten so far with the Switch 2. The sentiment is that the games are pretty good, or even good, but none of them are great. None of them are really games that are demanding in the psyche that you gotta buy the Switch 2 now. You have to play this game. None of those really exist yet. And we've already had a lot of games that have actually come out, but again, we're just not really there. In the end, too, a lot of these are remasters, and a lot of these are also available for the Switch 1. Now, if you play them on the Switch 1, again, they're not really the best place to play on the Switch 1, but again, you can just buy it used, or you can just pay $60. And again, you're not really getting that big of a graphical upgrade with what you're visually able to see. The upscaler is working for you. You're getting that 4K. You're getting a higher frame rate. You're getting even some of the ray tracing, but at the end of the day, it still looks like a game made for kids. It doesn't look like Unreal Engine. It doesn't look like the Snowdrop. It doesn't look like the Crytek engine. It is still made in simplistic engines and made in simplistic ways. And while it looks good and looks better, the graphical upgrade and the cost of it really doesn't seem to match. The Switch 2, for some people, also feels like it's being underutilized. And it kind of dampens the excitement. We also have Pokemon Champions coming up in 2026. We also have Poketopia. We also have some other games as well. We also just had another upgrade or remaster for an Animal Crossing game that again was for $10, but again it's like, if it's just $10, why not just give it to people? It really doesn't make a lot of sense. So again, we have the IPs that we are expecting. We've even had some IPs that are new. We've even brought back some old IPs that we haven't seen for almost 20 years. Like Metroid Prime. But again, when a lot of players are playing them, they're just not really that excited about them. Something is missing with these games. They're not scratching that itch that people are excited and waiting for. And if generally every game kind of feels this way, well, then it kind of doesn't really make the Switch 2 feel worth it. Even though it's $450 for most of us, or maybe $500 for most of us, and roughly, cheaper in Japan, it ultimately kind of doesn't feel like it's worth it. But we have a lot of games that are already available. Something else, too, that I thought was interesting was most of the Switch 1 games are backwards compatible. Some of them do have play issues, but most of them actually play pretty well. At least the original first-party games. Some of the third parties have some issues, but a lot of the first party actually works great. And most people have kind of been excited for the Switch 1 games to actually play better on the Switch 2. I don't think that's the intended point of the Switch 2 that Nintendo had when making and designing the console. Which the whole reason they built and made in the first place is because the Switch 1 was waning over the last few years. When we also take a look at the third-party games for the Switch 2, well, we found out that they didn't really sell except for 3, which was Cyberpunk, Street Fighter VI, and Fractoid. I think it was Fractoid. It was something like that. Maybe it was Factory, something like that. Some are saying that their sales were actually lower than their lowest expectations. Their games basically didn't sell at all. The port really wasn't worth the money to actually get over to the game, the time that they spent on it, the money they invested. There was also an issue with no dev kits for some of these for a lot of these companies, and still today, I don't think dev kits have really gone out. You just have to go buy a Switch 2 if you just want to see how you can actually play and build your game. Reasons why? I don't know. And maybe this is actually why some of the games don't actually run well. Is because, again, the dev kits weren't made, so they made the game with their best guess, and some of them kind of run like garbage, like Elden Ring. We got to see some people actually play test it, and yeah, the frame rate wasn't very good at all. And again, that's not the only one that's having issues in the third-party scene. And while the Switch 2 is not really why you buy third-party games, it is something that is nice to have, but pretty much every single game, while generally some run very, very well for the type of hardware that you have, the better experience is still elsewhere. Well, it wasn't very long after learning some about the Switch 2. Let's talk about the complaints through launch. Well, the console first. We had heating issues with some games, like Pokemon Legends ZA, that led to crashes or just the console shutting off. This is the beginning of a gen kind of slowly getting worse as we go forward, unfortunately. Because again, if you have to worry about heating problems, well, we all remember the Red Rings of Death with the 360. We'll also remember some of the heating issues that we had with the PlayStation 5, with some games where it was just taxed too hard and had to shut off. We got to see that with one of the cutscenes with Final Fantasy XVI. Also, the LCD screen is lower quality than the Switch 1. This actually got to be tested. And it's also variable on how bad it's going to be, quote-unquote bad. The issue that people are seeing is the ghosting on the screen. Joy-Con 2s still have exactly the same joysticks. Nothing was changed. For now $100, which is insane. There is a silicone sleeve to help with stick drift, but basically that just means to not ram it or move it so quickly. There's a little bit of resistance there to help slow it down so that you don't wear it out as fast. But still, even a month after launch, people are still having problems with stick drift. Right now, the company, Nintendo, is honoring warranties, but they're not going to do that forever. And for $100, $100, you better have some actual quality, and we don't have that. So yeah, this is definitely going to be cropping up mid-26 or at the end of 26, where people are like, look, my controllers are going out, my stick drift is a problem, I can't fix it, and it's $100 for a new one. Also, too, one of the other complaints was that the graphics rely very heavily on the NVIDIA upscaler that the Switch 2 got, because the actual hardware isn't overly powerful compared to what the Switch 1 was. It still is, but the numbers that they got were using the upscaler. 8, 10 times more powerful than the Switch 1, but again, when we're looking at the screen, we're not really seeing that. But we do have the 4K image, we do have the ray tracing, and we do have higher frame rates. But again, that doesn't really translate into the experience. And this is something that others and myself have already talked about with current gen hardware, is that we don't feel like the generation has really started for PlayStation and for Xbox. Is again, like, is the juice really worth the squeeze trying to get more graphic fidelity out there when most people can't even tell or don't even have the right TV to see it or monitor? That's kind of insane too. Because if you're going to enjoy the experience, well, 4K TVs are pretty easy to get. But if you're going to have the HDR and all of this other stuff on top of it, well, you need to be able to buy a TV that can actually see that. And there's also different qualities of that as well. If you want a pretty good one, you need to spend at least $1,000 on your TV. And not overly big either. And if you're going to go a little bit bigger, well, you're quickly jumping to $1,500, $2,000. So when we're looking at the benchmarks for graphics and performance anyway, for some of the hardware, the Switch 2 is actually weaker in some cases for the Series S. But then the upscaler bumps it above that. The upscaler also, while docked, it allows that 4K resolution and up to 120 hertz, but most games don't actually have 120 hertz. And your TV probably doesn't play it anyway. It really depends on the game and the TV that you have. Some games, too, we're finding are actually less than 60 frames per second, and some are actually running at 40, more or less 40 or 45, like Cyberpunk. The upscaler, too, also creates graphical issues, as they all do. You can have extra ghosting, you can have artifacting, and so while we're getting, quote, a better image, I wouldn't say we're really getting better quality, because it's no longer natively ran through the hardware. It's now ran through the upscaler, and the upscaler is not a benefit or to amplify the performance. It is the performance. It's not actually better. It's just artificially rendered for you with extra issues. Now, it is a pretty good upscaler. It does a good job. But people don't want to pay $450 for a console that's just really an upscaler. We also had some issues, too, with people finding out that they needed entirely new cards at faster writing speeds to expand their storage space. Because, let's be honest, 256 gigs isn't very big. Especially when some of your games, like Split Fiction, are 80 gigs. That's kind of insane. We also looked too at like Mario Kart World. I think that was 23 or 25 gigs. There's other games that are in the 40s and 50s or 60 gigs. So again, 256 doesn't go very far. So you definitely want to expand your memory. But now that we have 4K and ray tracing and HDR and some of this other stuff, well, we have to have faster writing speeds, and that makes the hard drives more expensive to buy, the expansion cards more expensive to buy. One of the other complaints that we had was also the bricking. This basically locks your console from any online features. It still turns on, it still runs, but if you need internet access for anything, updates, accessing the store, downloading your game from the server, you can't do that. And again, Nintendo gets to decide what they brick on. So if we read the EULA, the user agreement, if you're interested, it's all actually laid out in there. But here's some of the issues that we've had and some of the questions that we still have. MIG-switch use. Well, if the game was used and you put the game in your console, you can be bricked. And if you put the MIG-switch in your console, you can be bricked as well. That's just an update that rolls out later. Also, usernames have been flagged like Twinkie Links, just like it sounds, Twinkie Links. Well, the name was flagged and the console was banned for that user. That's $450 gone. Any modification to the hardware or software for the console, for the controller, for the game, and or other accessory completely null and voids it. Again, it will brick the console, and you just basically have a brick. I'm also worried too about do-it-yourself repair and replacement. If you don't use exactly the right brand or approved whatever from Nintendo, is it going to also brick your console? This also makes repair shops maybe possibly also have a problem, an issue in the future. And then the EULA, they can change it anytime. Nintendo has the power to do that. And so it could also honestly get worse in the future. There's nothing that will stop them from doing that. And these bricks are honestly permanent on the console. Again, there's no way to fix it. There's no way to reset it. There's no way to do nothing. It stays permanently bricked. And the reason this is a problem is because it affects the pre-owned market now. Because maybe you're like, hey, $350, $400, that's a pretty good deal. I'm going to go buy it. And then you realize your console is bricked. You can't access any online features whatsoever. And you just wasted your money. So we're not going to have a used market. And if you are going to do that, well, you need to make sure that the person actually shows you that you can get online, or that you take the device with them standing there, of course, and you get online yourself. You have to make sure you can check it. This also kind of helps create a nightmare for GameStop or any other third-party retro game stores that want to take in some consoles because, well, that's just something else they have to check now. And some of them have already said on their own pages and done shorts on their own channels that, yeah, I got screwed because I took in a console that was bricked and I can't do anything with it. So I've just lost that money. This also, too, affects the games because if they've been used with the big Switch and now it's going to be recognized by the Switch 2, well, then that also essentially bricks the game as well. But you don't realize that. You put it in and you play it, and then you later have an update saying that your console is bricked. And this doesn't just affect Switch 2 games. This affects also Switch 1 games. So this is kind of a problem because you can't really trust what you're buying unless you buy it brand new from Nintendo. And I'm sure they're not complaining about that because they're getting more revenue from you. There's also the key cards and the card keys. There is a difference there. Key cards are ultimately all third-party games except a few that require a download because, again, the data is not on the cartridge. It's up in the cloud server somewhere. So, again, when you have a bricked console, that's a really big deal because then you can't download your game even though you have the physical cartridge in your console itself. Yeah, bricking is kind of a big problem. The card keys, they're mostly first-party games, and they ultimately have all of the game files on there, which is nice. But then key cards ultimately kill physical ownership. And this was something that, again, people have complained about, and why I think, too, also that the third-party games didn't sell at launch because we started learning about the difference between card keys and key cards. Key cards aren't going to sell, and while it's physically there and in your hand, again, you don't have the data on the cartridge. Same with a lot of Xbox games today. Whether it's first party or third party, a lot of the data just isn't on the disc. We're starting to see that too more with PlayStation, and now we're seeing that now with Nintendo. And then PC is all digital anyway. And even on Steam, it tells you don't really own the game, you own a license to access the game. So we don't really have ownership anymore, period. Doesn't matter where you're playing, you just don't really own it. And a lot of the physical games that you do have still require an online connection anyway to actually play the game. So physical ownership is dead. We can debate about that, and hey, let's do a podcast on it. I actually wouldn't mind that too much, but ultimately it has shifted so far that over 80% of console sales, even on PlayStation, are now digital. Over 90% are digital on Xbox, 100% digital on PC, regardless of what store you're using. But yeah, this really does kind of strip out something that Nintendo is known for and replace it with just something that's more corporate. We also have Nintendo Switch Online. There is a backwards compatibility list, but it's limited, and it also needs work for the service. The service for some people is absolutely horrible. They can't play the game. It's buggy, it's glitchy, it's rendering really bad. It's got a super slow frame rate. There's incredible lag for some people. Other people are having a great time. They're not really experiencing a problem. But again, the backwards compatibility list is something you have to pay for if you want to do more than just the previous gen. So Switch 1, buy the game. Basically everything works on the Switch 2. But if you want to go older than that, you have to be able to just pay for the NSO. And then it's even further where there's an expansion pass for more backwards compatibility list. So the backwards compatibility list for the NSO is not just NSO, it's actually behind 2 paywalls. And of course, they take some of the better console generations like N64 and GameCube behind the most expensive second paywall. Because again, they know you're going to pay for it. And I think they're making a miscalculation here with the bricking, with the console itself, with the key cards, with NSO, with the backwards compatibility list, and again, with some of their IPs and games, is that they're thinking that the player base will ultimately just bend over. I think some of them will. I think they already bought their console. I think going forward, we're going to see quite the slowdown in actual sales of the console. I still think it'll sell pretty well, but I don't think we'll get over 50 million for the entire generation. Maybe I'm wrong about that, and yeah, I can be wrong about that. But honestly, that's what I think. I have never seen the sentiment so low after launch for a console. The hype and expectation being met with the reality has never been so disparaged before. Not that I can ever remember for any console. Something interesting, too, that we're possibly going to see in the future is that the upgrades for the Switch 2 versions of games might actually compete with the backwards compatibility list. So again, if they want you to buy one or the other, well, they don't want to give you too much for your backwards compatibility list or do too many remasters because, again, they want you to buy and invest in both services. I feel like to a degree, this is what we see actually with PlayStation as well. They're not going to remaster some of the old games because, again, you can just buy the backwards compatibility list through PSN or PlayStation Plus. But yeah, they'll ultimately never do both. And let's talk about all of the paywalls, since we're already kind of on that track. So the backwards compatibility. There's a ton of it through NSO. A lot of it is limited. It's basically the most popular. They work on selecting those across the gens. It relies on an internet connection and server demand, and so the quality can actually be pretty bad. Party Chat 2 is free, through May of next year. Then you have to pay. You have to pay for NSO, Nintendo Switch Online. The video camera, too, that we have is also very cheap. It's only 1080p, and they want to charge you $55 for it. Then it also requires NSO. There's also a Mario-themed one, which is great, but again, it's a 480p camera. Also, the camera feed is horrifically bad. It's not even like 20 frame rate. It's more like 15 or less. And again, you don't really need to sit there and watch someone else play. You can kind of see out of the peripheral on the bottom of your screen. But again, it's like, that's not really that good. Why are we paywalling this? Why are all of the hardware and accessories so expensive? Because again, $55 plus NSO is laughable. I'm going to pay for game chat, for video chat, at $55 just for the accessory, more for the Mario-themed one for worse resolution and quality, for it to stream like crap and trash. I don't think people are really going to pay for that. It's not competitive. And we're starting to see, too, kind of the breakdown between Nintendo isn't just in its own little bubble anymore. They're trying to catch up with some of the current gens, and the younger generations thinks it's laughable with what they're actually getting versus what they've had on other platforms. and they're not that excited about it. Again, most of what we see people talking about is that Nintendo is played and bought and reviewed and made content for by 30 and 40-year-olds. Younger generations don't care as much. Again, they didn't grow up with Mario. They didn't grow up with Metroid Prime. They didn't grow up with any of this. Instead, they grew up with COD and Fortnite and Rainbow Six Siege and Apex and Rocket League and some of these other games. That's what they grew up with. Roblox, Minecraft. They're going to play those games. But again, that's not going to be a big enough draw, even though some of those are playable now on the Switch too. Like Fortnite, it's not going to be enough of a draw to get them to actually go out and buy a Switch 2, especially at the cost of almost $500 and $100 controllers and $55 video cameras. On top of NSO, again, there's that expansion pass, just adding more retro backwards compatible games. And while it is fairly cheap, it's still just extra money out of your pocket. There's also the Virtual Boy, which was another paywall. This is a $100 accessory to play the entire Virtual Boy library. But you still need to put your Switch 2 into the Virtual Boy itself accessory to play any of those games. Again, it plays on the Switch 2, but you have to insert the Switch into the Boy so that you can actually play. And that's kind of crazy. I think if you wanted the Virtual Boy accessory, you could pay for it, but again, they're making it a requirement for another $100. Again, it's just a more corporate move than what we've kind of remember and know Nintendo for. Nintendo has always been corporate. I'm not saying they're not, but it is kind of getting ridiculous when we start seeing how corporatized they are being, how much of a shift they're being with their backwards compatibility, with their Switch, with the bricking, with their user agreement, with the games and the remasters and the upgrades, and looking at the cost of all of their accessories that basically aren't improved. They're still just pretty much garbage, if we're being honest, compared to other competition that's out there. And again, they are utilizing their paywalled garden to the max, as hard as they can. We also have a GameCube wireless controller that is only available through Nintendo, that is only available for the Switch 2, and that's $50. It might actually be now more with tariffs. We'll have to see. And then too, when we talk about the pricing, due to market conditions, well, they raised the cost of the Switch 1, the standard, the OLED, and the Lite. They raised them all. And they also increased prices on the controller, the camera, the carry case, and also variable pricing for video games for the Switch 2. Again, the $55 camera, the $100 Joy-Con, the $80 video game. We also found out too that Pokopia is going to be a key card at $70. That game looks like a joke. It doesn't look worth it at all. If we thought that Pokemon Legends ZA isn't really worth the $70 price tag, well, what the heck is this? And because it's Pokemon, they're charging you $70. The Amiibos, $30 to $50. And they're quickly going to go up in price too because they're only going to make so many of them. And the Amiibos have always had some things that have been extra with them, extra perks, unlocking some things in the game. They've always had that. But now we're getting to a point where Metroid Prime 4, we're paywalling background music now. It just sounds insane, guys. That's something we've never seen before. So by the time you're done buying the Switch 2, an extra pair of Joy-Cons because they're going to break, 2 games at a standard price of $70, an NSO family plan, not even the expansion pass, you're looking at almost $800 US. Ouch. Is that really worth it? A lot of people have gone out and bought the console. 10.3 million units sold so far. They've probably sold 12 or 13 or 15 million by now, with Black Friday and also Christmas coming right around the corner. they'll probably hit that. But I think, too, there's been a lot of content creators. There's been a lot of studios and publishers that have bought in units, again, because they wanted to create the content for their channel, and they also wanted something because they couldn't get the dev kits. And I think they've sold a lot of those. When we take a look at those that are keeping track of data, we still only have October numbers at the beginning of the month or the middle of October, and we don't have any of the November numbers yet. Even the rest of October, we don't even have yet. The data has become pretty delayed. And looking forward, there's not a ton of games that overly look exciting for too many people. I think Pokemon Champions will actually sell pretty well. But generally speaking, can you think of one? Pokemon Champions, what else is coming out next year? Most of us probably don't know. The things that we think of is like the big titles or the continuations of different IPs on different platforms. But again, we're not overly excited for Switch 2 stuff. It's really died off. And when we take a look at the financials here, let's go ahead and pull this up. This is the current stock price of Nintendo. So this was roughly launch, right in here. This was leading up to launch. Very good growth, right? Very good growth. Well, we finally had launch, and it's gone up some, but it's kind of hit the top twice, and now it's coming back down. And it's really bad when you cross this white line. That's the 200-day moving average is starting to roll over. And the stock price has already moved through that, even though their earnings are really good. They've done a great job. But why isn't the stock moving up? Why is it having a hard time getting up anymore? Well, as we see here in the news, we have the memory cost issue. The RAM. Anything that uses RAM, when it's gone up hundreds of percent, for an increase, it's going to affect the cost of the unit. And either the company needs to absorb the cost, which most can't right now, because their margins are too low, regardless of company, or they're going to have to pass it on to the consumer, or they'll have to split it between the consumer and themselves, which is usually what's ends up happening. And some have more wiggle room than everyone else. But yeah, there's going to be a global memory squeeze because even Micron, they just quit making consumer RAM. They're going to completely focus on just AI market now for making it for those commercial companies. So that's going to make it worse. And RAM 2, well, it's already kind of been expensive. We've had the launch of a new console. We're had the new launch of a handheld. Several, actually. We also have a new graphics card through AMD and also NVIDIA and Intel. So there's been a lot of new stuff coming out lately, and there's just not enough supply. And the thing, too, that I think is interesting is that when we actually take a look at their profit margin, it's been actually pretty good. That was 10%, that was 29%, 20%, 17%, and 19.5%. So it's been pretty good, but again, they used to have a pretty consistent 27, 28, 27, 29%, but now we're at 24%. And I think 2025, again, we're going to be closer to 20%. It's going to go down even some more. So Nintendo is not making the profit that they were. Things cost more, and while they're still getting a lot of revenue, their profit margins are going down. And that's not necessarily a trend that we want to see in a company. Year over year, you either want it to be steady or kind of have some variability of up and down, but you don't want a trend of going down. And usually when we see kind of a stagnation in the stock price, or we kind of see it trending down some, that means that the investors, the traders, they know that something's up because they're keeping up with the news every day and making decisions on that stock price. And yeah, I think memory is definitely going to be a problem. Because while Nintendo has already made consoles now, they're still going to need to make consoles in the future. And I don't know if they can keep the price at $450. I think it'll be easy to see that we see it at $500 or $550. And then, is that really worth it? Because again, the games are good, but we've seen the corporate side of Nintendo. See, it's no longer just product, consume product. It's now, hey, we'll nickel and dime you for product and dangle more product at cost in front of you. Because we have the issue of the bricking, we have the issue of a lot of the games, while they're good, they're not great. And it's tough to kind of make the sale of $70, $80 for a video game, $20 to $30 for DLC, when it's so small so far. And then all of the other paywalls that we have, the issues with Joy-Con 2s being $100 for the same crappy joystick. I mean, again, people can enjoy the Switch 2. In fact, you can love these games. I think I would love some of these games. But I've never seen such a blatant corporate shift from a company. Because again, as we said in the beginning, the focus was the family. The focus was affordability. And it really doesn't feel like that anymore. It is more affordable compared to the competitors, yes, but the juice isn't really worth the squeeze for 4K and artifacting with the upscaler and ray tracing and HDR TV for a TV I don't really have. I may not even be able to see all of that stuff, even though I'm paying for it. Nor do I maybe really care. So we don't have a light version, and we know too that there will be a Switch 2 OLED version. How much do you think that's going to cost? I think that at a minimum is $550, if not $600. And then if we have RAM issues on top of it that continue for the next couple of years, well, maybe in 2027 or 28 when we get that OLED model, that might be an issue. And Nintendo's window right now to sell consoles is right now. Because the reason why they have sold the Switch 1 and the Switch 2 staggered from PlayStation and Xbox is because when there's direct competition, they don't sell units. I'm serious. When we look at the GameCube, when they did that, and also the Wii U, while there were maybe some other issues with those consoles, they really didn't sell well at all. And the Wii is kind of a unique one because that was half the cost. Well, we're not really roughly at half the cost anymore. That means the next-gen consoles would have to be $900. Maybe we'll get there. We'll have to see. I definitely don't think the PlayStation will be $900. And the Xbox might be $900. Might be $1,000. Some have said $1,200, but again, we don't know what the price is. Sarah Bond nor Spencer have said anything. We'll just have to wait and see. But I do think the setup that we have is that the Switch 2 might ultimately be deemed as a failure. I think that's possible. Not that it didn't make money, not that it wasn't profitable, but that it doesn't meet the expectations of Nintendo and its investors. I think that's very possible. Because again, when you're continuing to restrict and focus and funnel as much money as possible, even paywalling background music for a video game, the kids might accept it, but those kids that played these games and these IPs, well, they're not kids anymore. They have families, they have rent, they have other responsibilities, they have student loans. There's 42 million that have student loans just in the United States. And two, the last several years that we had, well, that was all held up by stimulus for the taxpayer. Trillions of dollars. Well, we don't have that stimulus. So now we're starting to look at a real economy, and there's closures, layoffs, doesn't matter what industry, implementation of AI tools and other stuff. And then we look at what we're getting, and it's like, wow, it's buggy. The updates kind of screwed the game, and it really doesn't look that different compared to what we already had. So I think it's possible that the Switch 2, while it's selling really good out of the gate, I think that's partly a push from content creators and companies needing to buy the console because they didn't get dev kits. And maybe that's why we're not seeing actually some of the games that we kind of expect from some of the publishers at launch, because again, the games aren't ready. And they're not going to put out a game that's not ready, especially when we already had the ones that launched say, yeah, basically we didn't sell any games unless it was Cyberpunk Street Fighter 6 or Factoid or whatever that game was. So Nintendo still has very low debt, still has good profit margins, but the trend is starting to go in the wrong direction. And the sentiment is certainly negative. It's good, but is good enough? So with that, folks, thanks for tuning in. You can always follow me over at Gaming Garbage 22, and there's various content every week. And again, if something isn't for you, don't sweat it. Just blip on through the playlist there. That's how I'm dividing all of the content up. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and engage the algos for me. But also, too, if you'd like to take a look at my worst game of the year, that will be here at the end screen. Also, you can follow me over at Twitch if you'd like, and when I'm playing video games, you can certainly chat with me. Or you can just be a silent partner, too, if you'd like. Either way is perfectly fine with me. But yeah, I think going forward, whether you're Nintendo, PlayStation, or Xbox, or PC, I think affordability is really just kind of going out the window. And I think, too, the quality is going down. Because while some games are fun, they're not really that enjoyable anymore. And I think we've even seen that with some of the Nintendo games. We see what they're doing. We see that they're squeezing, and every company is. And is it really worth it? Well, that's up for you to decide. It's your money. And with that, folks, we'll see you guys on the next one.